As someone who analyzes other people's homes for a living, do you think my brain simply shuts down the designer mode whenever I'm living my life, visiting friends, family, stuff like that? No, sir. I just cannot help scanning the place whenever I walk into a room. And there are a few things that I notice and others might not. And I'm not talking about style, because everyone has different tastes. No, it's those things that end up making a space feel off, you know? So I decided to make a video about it. Here are the subtle design mistakes that I immediately notice when I walk into a home, and you might not. Okay, so let me start with the number one thing that I notice whenever I walk into a room, and that, by the way, happens a lot. Hanging art too high. Now, I think it's great that the person took the time to select an art piece that they like and hang it. It helps with filling up the vertical space, and it's also a great way to translate some personality into the room. But this intention is pretty much undermined if the piece is hung too high. It curiously looks even more unbalanced than having nothing at all because of all the empty space left underneath. And this is such an easy thing to fix. I would say in 90% of the time, art or pictures should be hung at eye level. And this is true for the ones on the wall behind the sofa, the horizontal gallery wall in a dining room or hallway, the single picture on a small wall as the focal point behind the bed, and so on. I've always wondered why so many people hang their art too high, and I think I have a theory. I think it has to do with leaving enough empty space around the piece, especially if it's hung above something else, like a cabinet. Like they're trying to leave enough breathing room all around. Now, let me tell you that this space that's left between the picture and what's underneath actually completely breaks the sensation that they should belong together. It's like you're aiming for creating that corner of interest, but it never looks quite right, exactly because of this gap. And since we're talking about corners of interest, here's a situation where it's okay to hang art lower than eye level. Imagine you have an entryway cabinet that's not too high. Instead of hanging a picture above it and leaving this gap, try hanging it a bit lower and layering one element in front of it, like a vase or a sculpture. This creates a much more intimate and intentional corner, and so our brains perceive the whole scene as an interesting piece. A few other spaces where this also works: above nightstands, desks, and even an accent chair, just like the one I have in my dining room. Notice how the smaller frame is lower than it should be theoretically, but it works because it bridges the gap between the chair and the larger piece above it. Now, if you want a gallery wall that extends from floor to ceiling, it's also absolutely okay to hang pieces lower and higher than eye level. But for all other applications, stick to this rule, and it will make your room look more harmonious. I want to take a moment to introduce you to something that I didn't know I needed, but have been using and loving for the past few months. This content is brought to you in partnership with Foreo, and this is their FAQ 202, a new generation of LED face mask. I had never considered an LED treatment before, because when it comes to beauty treatments, I tend to do everything by myself at home. I do my own nails, I cut my own hair, and stick to a pretty simple skincare routine. But this mask is such a good fit for me, because being able to improve the look and feel of my skin with such an advanced technology that I can use while working is just perfect. The FAQ 202 is a silicone wireless mask molded to fit any face shape, which means it's ultra lightweight and very comfortable to wear. And it has 8 different wavelengths, including NIR, which helps to tackle signs of aging and other skin concerns. I've been personally using the app-guided 12-minute oil balancing treatment since I tend to have quite a bit of acne on my chin area. And I already noticed a reduction in the overall redness of this region. Besides, the skin feels smoother, softer, and less dull. So if you'd like to check out the FAQ 202 and other Foreo bestsellers, click the link in my description box. And don't forget to use my code TALES30 for an extra 30% off on almost all Foreo products. The code also applies to already discounted items, so you'll get an extra 30% off. So don't miss out on this great offer. And thanks Foreo for partnering with me on this video. Okay, so we talked about hanging things on walls previously, and I have to mention the TV. Part of me just dies inside whenever I see a TV that's mounted too high, especially if this means having to tilt it downwards, just like in a sports bar or a pub. I don't know, but to me this aesthetic just doesn't belong in a home. And you will never see a well-designed room with a TV that's mounted like that. A TV, just like a piece of art, should be hung ideally at eye level, but in relation to when you're sitting on the couch. It makes for a more harmonious look and a much more comfortable viewing experience, since you don't have to look up to see the screen. Now, I know this is not always possible, especially if you have a fireplace in the room. I have mentioned this in previous videos, but I'm not a fan of mounting the TV above the fireplace, especially if it looks like this. And the main reason for that is exactly because it often means that the TV is gonna be too high. In spaces where the fireplace has a more subtle presence, like it's part of a feature wall or something, I think it's absolutely okay, like the one in my living room, for example. But I still think that my TV is hung too high. It would look better if the gap between the fireplace and the TV were smaller. But since when we moved in, the TV mount was already in place, we really had no choice but to accept it. It is what it is. But if you do have a choice, go for something like this. Or if you don't have a fireplace, something like this. Not this. If your fireplace stands out like this one alternative I would consider is using a TV stand instead of mounting it above the fireplace. There are very elegant options that don't clash with the design of the rest of the room and actually makes the TV almost look like a piece of art. Hey, are you enjoying the video so far? If so, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel to see more content like this. Okay, this one also happens a lot, having a rug that's too small. Now, this one really makes me sad, because the person already took the time to choose a rug, spent the money on it, and let's be honest, rugs can get really expensive. And still, an undersized rug will most likely make the space look worse. Of course, this is more noticeable in living rooms, but it also happens in dining rooms and bedrooms. Oftentimes, the space is beautiful, but the tiny rug ruins the day. So let's start with the living room situation. Having a rug that sits in the middle of the space just isn't enough. As a rule of thumb, at least the front legs of all furniture pieces should be on the rug. But sometimes even that will look awkward. Say you have a rug that's exactly the same length of your sofa. Then you throw in an extra chair or two, maybe a coffee table in the center. See how the pieces don't have any breathing room between them? It would look much better if the rug were larger. Same space, same furniture, but somehow the living room looks bigger now. Now for dining rooms. Let me start by saying that different than in the living room, where rugs are pretty much required, you can go without one in the dining room. Not having a rug in a well-designed dining room with beautiful pieces will not make it look worse. But an undersized rug actually might. The best approach here is having the chairs on the rug even when they're pulled back or someone's sitting on them. So it has to be large enough for that. It not only looks better, but it's actually more functional as well, as it's very annoying to have the legs of the chair stuck on the rug when pushing it forward. And finally, bedrooms. A rug is such a key item to ground the bed in a bedroom, but if it's too small, it ends up disappearing under it. So to keep things simple, here's a size guide depending on the size of your bed and size of your bedroom, as larger bedrooms can accommodate larger rugs. So remember those tips when you're choosing a rug for the space. And if you already have an undersized rug, consider selling it and getting a new one, or you can layer it on top of a larger rug, as it creates a very interesting effect. Okay. This item on my list appears so often, and I myself have been a victim of it until a few years ago. Lack of lamps, or relying only on the overhead lights to light up the space. I know for a fact that lamps can be easily overlooked, because besides having bedside lamps, they just weren't on my radar before I started learning about interior design. When you see lighting as just a functional part of the house, that's understandable. Why do I need multiple light sources in my living room, bedroom, kitchen, and even bathrooms if I can see just fine just with the overhead lights? But ever since I added those extra light sources to my house, I just can't help but notice that a lot of people don't pay attention to that. So here's your sign to get a few extra lamps. Lighting is truly one of the most important factors in making a home feel cozy and inviting. Take my living room as an example. Which scene looks better? I would pick this one 1,000 times over. Think about that fancy restaurant you liked, or that nice hotel you stayed in. They all have lighting in common. That warm atmosphere with multiple pools of light all around. So besides your functional lamps, like a desk lamp or the overhead lights, try adding a couple more, like a floor lamp next to your sofa and a table lamp on the shelf. You can also add a picture light above one of your favorite pictures on the wall. Just make sure to choose the warm light bulbs, as they are essential to creating that cozy atmosphere. 2700 to 3000 Kelvin are good alternatives. Okay, so here's another thing that I notice in other people's homes. Oversized furniture. I think this has become more common nowadays as newer apartments and homes keep getting smaller and smaller every year. And I completely understand the need to fit comfortable and functional pieces into a small space. So this is not me judging anyone's choices. But from a design perspective, it's not ideal, because filling a small space with big furniture will make the space look heavy and unbalanced. Now, I will not sit here and tell you to get a smaller sofa so it can look proportional to the size of your living room, if that means something like this. I mean, I wouldn't sacrifice comfort for looks in this situation, because I would just feel miserable whenever I sit down to watch TV. But if you happen to live in a reasonably larger place and your furniture still looks like this, then yes, consider replacing a few of those bulky items for slimmer ones if you want a more harmonious looking home. Here are a few practical tips. If you have a pair of sofas, consider replacing one of those for a pair of chairs with open legs. If, besides the sofa, your coffee table is a solid piece, like this, consider getting a smaller one with exposed legs. Maybe even a glass tabletop. If your living room is very small and the sofa already occupies most of the space, consider replacing the coffee table for a couple of side tables that can be easily moved. That way you can keep the functionality without having another large piece in the space. In the sofa department, between two sofas of the same size, one with exposed legs will look lighter in comparison. And this is a great alternative for reducing visual weight, no matter the size of the room. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it is possible to have a room that looks balanced and harmonious without sacrificing comfort if we make a few smart choices. Okay, and since we're talking about furniture, here's another thing that happens a lot. When every furniture piece is pushed to the edges of the room. I know that might seem like the most obvious choice. Just push everything close to the wall and leave the center free for circulation. But that ends up making the room look off and unbalanced, exactly because of that large empty space. Of course, if your living room is small or very narrow, there's not much we can do. Everything kinda has to touch the walls. But in larger places, having floating pieces of furniture can really make the space look more interesting. And that doesn't mean you have to put the sofa in the center of the room. It can be more subtle than that. For instance, in wider living rooms, you can choose to leave a gap between the sofa and the wall, and then add interesting pieces behind it, such as a lamp or a shelf with interesting decor objects and plants. If that isn't an option, just having one or two floating chairs in the space can make a huge difference. Take my living room as an example. It's quite wide, meaning there's a lot of space between the couch and the TV. But I can leave a gap behind the sofa because of the balcony door that opens from this side, and that will compromise the path of travel. So, to make this layout more interesting and fill up some of the negative space, I added two chairs facing the sofa, and now the room looks way more balanced and more interesting. You could also add a single chair, like this or this. By the way, I have a video all about living room layout ideas. I'll leave the link in the description. Alright, so these are the things that I immediately notice whenever I walk into a room. Of course, I don't walk around telling people that their room looks off, unless they ask my opinion, but I do notice them. Are you guilty of any of those mistakes? Did I miss something? Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments, even if you don't. If you like this video, I think you might want to watch this one next. But before you do that, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.